All right, we're going to finish up our section on invertebrates, and the last phylum we have to go over is the phylum Echinodermata. This is going to include things like sea stars, sea urchins, bristle stars, and we'll go over each one of those classes as we go through the lecture today. So for the phylum Echinodermata, they are marine bottom dwellers. This means you're going to find them in saltwater ecosystems and usually on the bottom of the ocean floor. They have an endoskeleton. So we have that word there, endo, meaning within. So it's an internal skeleton. It's composed of calcareous plates. Calcareous means it's made of calcium. And they call these plates ossicles. So if, depending on the class, we have different forms of spines or bristles, etc. They're going to be protruding. There's going to be some of these spines protruding through their skin. They have autotomizing limbs. This means that if one of their limbs gets cut off, it can actually grow back. And that is if the central disc is not disrupted. And the central disc, we'll see a lot of examples of it, but if you follow my cursor over to the right here, this is going to be the central disc of this bristle star here. This is the central disc of the sea star. They have pentaradial symmetry. So pentaradial, so 5 parts. It can be divided into 5 equal parts, and the larval stage of this phylum is bilaterally symmetrical. They have a complex system that can be used for things like movement, and this is called the water vascular system. The water vascular system, the coelom forms water-filled canals. It can be used to help transport gases and nutrients for the organism, and it can help with movement by muscles contracting against a hydrostatic pressure. So we kind of saw something similar to this when I was talking about nematodes and how they use their hydrostatic skeleton, which is pretty much just a fluid-filled area of the body that has increased pressure. So if you change the pressure through muscle contraction, it can help with movement. So something very similar with our water vascular system for the phylum Echinodermata. They have these specialized appendages called tube feet. The tube feet, depending on the class, they can be used for locomotion or for things like filter feeding. So I have this large image here to kind of piece apart this water vascular system. This is for one of our sea stars. The opening for the water vascular system that lets water in is right here. This is called the madreporite. So this is an opening that, the opening into the water vascular system. If we look here, this madreporite opens up into this canal here that rings around that central disc. So this is the central canal. And then the water vascular system is going to go this way. So these are the structures inside of the arm. This is the radial canal. This radial canal has these balloon-like structures called ampulla. So if we zoom in to here, here's an ampulla, and the ampulla has this protrusion coming out, and this is the tube foot, I guess in this case, because I'm just talking about one. So each one of those is going to have tube feet. And what the water vascular system can do is that as water comes in, water flows into this canal and balloons up these ampulla and increases the pressure. As the pressure increases, so here's our ampulla again, pressure increasing because it has a lot more water. As the pressure increases, it will push out those tube feet. And then those tube feet can be used for, in this case, for movement. This is the class Asteroidea, which should be the first one we go over. But the tube feet can look different depending on the class and can be used for different things depending on the class. So in this instance, these tube feet are going to be used for movement. Now, if we look more at this dissection diagram, we have things like our stomach here. Here's our anus at the top. So the anus is for excretion, letting out all of the solid waste. And we have digestive glands here. So this is obviously going to be used for digestion, gonads in this arm. But one thing to note, this diagram has each one of these structures in separate arms. But this is not what is actually reality. Each one of these arms has all of these structures. So this diagram pieces them apart, but really in each arm, all of these systems are inside of the arms. Each arm has digestive glands, the water vascular system with ampulla, and gonads. So very dense arms in this case. So some characteristics of the phylum Echinodermata. Echino means spiny. Dermata, dermis, refers to skin. So they are referred to as the spiny skinned ones. There are 5 classes we are going to go over today. Asteroidea, these are our sea stars. Ophiuroidea, our bristle stars. Crinoidea, these are sea lilies and feather stars. Echinoidea, sea urchins and sand dollars. And finally, we'll finish up with Holothuroidea, our sea cucumbers. Some ecological importances for this phylum. They are, again, they are living on the bottom of the ocean floor, and they can inhabit a lot of what researchers refer to as biotic deserts. They are some of the first organisms to come into a recently disturbed area and start recolonizing the area. They're the first ones, so they're the pre-colonizers. So things like sea urchins and, another ecological importance is that I've talked a lot about that relationship between urchins and sea otters in kelp forests. Whenever we went over our algae lectures and I was talking about kelp, there's a very intricate relationship between these 3 organisms. The kelp forests they can be very large and reach all the way up from the ocean floor into the top of the water column and even reaching the surface. This acts as habitat for our sea otters, so they live in the kelp forests. The sea otters eat sea urchins. The sea urchins eat kelp forests. And so they're each keeping one another in balance. The sea otters eat the urchins eat the kelp house the otters. So if you take out one of those components, you can have some really big ecological impacts. And this has historically happened. Sea otters were hunted for a long time, and they were almost hunted to extinction. But a lot of protective measures are now in place to help protect sea otters. But when the otters were removed from their ecosystem, the population of sea urchins exploded because their predator disappeared. So because the sea urchin population exploded, the kelp forests were then decimated because there was no one keeping the urchins in check, and so they just chowed down on those kelp forests. Luckily, through a lot of protective measures, those ecosystems are starting to see some recovery. Some economical importances. A lot of limestone deposits in our fossil record are from things in the phylum Echinodermata. A lot of chitons are, not chitons, I apologize. Well, I just had a huge brain fart. Sorry, guys. Are crinoids. Crinoids in the class Crinoidea. A lot of crinoids make up limestone deposits. These serve as model organisms for teaching about developmental biology because this is the first time we see deuterostomes. So our phylum Echinodermata are, in fact, deuterostomes. All right, the first class we are going over is the class Asteroidea. These are our sea stars. Sea stars are active predators. They mostly hunt things like bivalves, so those are clams, oysters, etc., gastropods, and even corals. The class Asteroidea usually has 5 stout arms lined with short spines, and these spines are not going to be used, the arms themselves are not used for movement. The tube feet are used for movement. So the tube feet will come out of this central portion here of the arm, and the tube feet will emerge from here and then allow for movement. So it's actually the tube feet that allows movement in the class Asteroidea, not the arms. They have dermal gills. So here's that root word derm again. So we're referring to the skin. So dermal gills, gills that extend off of the skin and aid in gas exchange. So that is how they breathe. They have these structures called pedicellaria. They are microscopic jaws surrounding the spines, and they can aid in defense. So here's an image up here of one of these pedicellaria, again used for defense. And I don't think you would want to mess around with a sea star that was the size of a person if it had one of these going on. Then they have these structures called the ambulacral groove. This is an opening along the bottom of the arms for the tube feet to emerge. So this groove here on the bottom side of our sea star, this is the ambulacral groove, and our tube feet will emerge from that groove and allow for movement. All right, next we have the class Ophiuroidea. These are our brittle stars. This translates more or less to snake-like ones. This is because their arms are very movable, flexible, and they kind of look like a bunch of snakes when they're moving around. So the class Ophiuroidea, they live in deep ocean waters, usually about 1,600 feet below sea level. They scavenge on dead organic matter. So if you can think about what happens in oceans when an ocean-dwelling fish or mammal, such as whales, die, they sink to the bottom. And so we even have deep ocean scavengers, like our brittle stars, that are going to go and scavenge on that dead organic matter. Most of the time, they're going to be nocturnal. This allows them to hopefully avoid predation. Again, they have those slender, snake-like arms. They're very flexible, and unlike the class Asteroidea, they do use their arms for movement. And their ossicles, remember, that's what we call those calcareous plates composing the endoskeleton. Their ossicles are stacked. So if you look at this image up here, and I wonder, no, I can't zoom in. You might be able to see some very small grooves along these arms. Those are those stacked ossicles. They have a closed ambulacral groove, so there's no opening under the arms for tube feet. Rather, their tube feet emerge between the ossicles, so between these grooves. So if you look at this GIF here, you can actually see some of those tube feet coming out perpendicularly from the arm. So they emerge between the ossicles, and they can help the organism sense light and odors, so chemical communication in the water. All right, next we have the class Crinoidea. These are our sea lilies and feather stars, and their name kind of translates to lily-like ones. That's why we call them sea lilies. So they are the most ancient group of echinoderms. They can live in a variety of ocean depths, from shallow to deep water. Their mouth and anus is on top. Remember when we talked about our nematodes, we introduced the topic of incomplete versus complete digestion. So while our class Crinoidea does still have complete digestion, their mouth and anus are located right next to each other. So they have a U-shaped gut, kind of like our snail gut torsion that I introduced when I talked about gastropods. They are filter feeders, so particles that are trapped in their tube feet along the arms, and their arms are licked clean by the mouth. So if you look at this GIF up here, this organism is swimming in the water column, but while it's doing that, those feather-like arm appendages are collecting food particles, and if this organism were actively feeding, it could actually pull that arm up into here I'll move. Now we're talking about this one here. So these feather-like arms will capture food particles, and then it will pull that arm into the central disc area and more or less lick it clean. They also have stacked ossicles. Like our class Ophiuroidea, their ossicles are stacked, and this is going to form the arms and the stalk. So in this case, our sea lily here, this is our stalk, lifting up their feather-like arms. Their arms are divided into pinnules, so they pinnate branches that trap food particles. So here's our arm, and then coming off of here are our pinnules. Arm with pinnules. Next we have the class Echinoidea. These are sea urchins and sand dollars. The class Echinoidea, they do not have arms, so this separates them from the other three classes that we've talked about so far. Rather, they have this specialized structure that is a shell, almost like a shell. This is called the test. So the test is a round shell formed by the fusion of ossicles. So these are those calcareous plates fusing together to form the test. Movement is controlled by the tube feet. Again, they are going to protrude through holes in the test. So coming out of the test here, you can almost see some of these itty-bitty holes all on this test. The tube feet are going to emerge from those holes and allow for movement. Again, using that water vascular system. They have a special structure called the Aristotle's lantern. This is a special feeding structure. It kind of looks like the freaking face from Predator. It's horrifying to look at when you dissect a sea urchin. But this is the Aristotle's lantern, and it's used for scraping algae off of rocks or used to eat prey. This structure is composed of 5 ossified plates. So that's the Aristotle's lantern for the class Echinoidea, a feeding structure. The last class we're going to talk about is the class Holothroidea. These are our sea cucumbers. So we have some characteristics here. They feed with branched tube feet, abundant on deep sea floors. They don't have arms, but they do still exhibit that pentaradial symmetry. You can see that pentaradial symmetry really well in this picture here. So if you look at this, it just looks like, a sea cucumber, like a giant blob on the ocean floor. However, if you look right here, you can see this little star-shaped anus. And this is where you can start to see visually on the outside of the organism its pentaradial symmetry. So it still has those 5 parts. It's just more internal rather than externally evident. So they do have soft bodies. This is pretty different from the others in the phyla. Their ossicles are highly reduced. That gives them that soft body. And rather they have collagen fibers. So that compound that makes up the cartilage in our ears and in our nose, that's really what's giving them more of their structure. So collagen fibers provide support, but can disconnect at will. So this allows them to hide inside of very tight rock crevices. They have either no or very few spines. For feeding, they have specialized tube feet for feeding. They're modified tube feet, and they are filter feeding. So they have a mucus-like substance on those tube feet that traps small food particles like plankton and detritus, and the food is scraped off by the arms by the mouth. So here's a really good GIF example of a filter feeding sea cucumber. Yep. They do have that pentaradial symmetry. Again, it's less obvious. In this image, you can kind of see that pentaradial symmetry. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines going down the length of the body. So this one has coloration that makes the pentaradial symmetry more evident. As a defense mechanism, they are capable of expelling sticky tubules from their cloaca. The cloaca it's kind of an all-purpose orifice. So it's used for pooping. So they use it for pooping, but they also use it for reproduction. So the cloaca, they do still have a mouth, so it is still complete digestion, but the cloaca is still acting as a multi-purpose orifice. So they expel, it's actually their digestive tract that they can expel out of their cloaca to entangle predators. Sometimes those sticky tubules will have chemicals on them that can be lethal to potential predators. Okay, so that finishes up the invertebrate section, and we're going to be getting into vertebrates for our next part of the lecture series.